Hello everyone, the Instant Camera Guy here. I wasn't intending on doing an unboxing of this video. This was a camera sent to me by a client of mine named Caleb. I've just covered up the addresses and things. But I noticed that there's a tear in the packaging, and if we flip the box over, a corresponding tear in the underside of the box. So I figured I should probably do a bit of an unboxing and make sure that this isn't damaged. This is one of the rare instances that I've seen a package actually damaged by Australia Post. It's incredibly rare. But I just wanted to see if the camera survived. And if it did survive, well, maybe we can take it apart and give it a bit of a diagnosis. Alright. Well, looks like Caleb's been nice enough to provide me with some prints. That's wonderful. Thank you for that, Caleb. I actually have a growing collection of prints sent to me from clients. But look, honestly, it seems that the camera so far has survived. I'm seeing no signs of damage whatsoever. And what we have here is an SX-70 Model 2. I think this is going to make a nice candidate for refurb. And I do know that Caleb wants this thing modified to take 600 film too. So how about I clear the bench and come right back to it. Alright, Caleb included a note inside which says, "Hi Jake, thanks for looking at this Model 2 for me. I'm very excited about having this camera in tip-top condition. It is completely untested, so whatever you find will be a surprise." Ooh, I'm excited already, Caleb. He says, "In the end, I decided that he'd like to have it refurbished only. And if Caleb gets a Model 1 Alpha, then he might go for the full PCB upgrade." Caleb is referring to the SX-70R Bluetooth PCBs. We chatted about the possibility of doing this because he did want this thing 600 converted. So he's basically said, so his order is SX-70 Model 2, fully refurbish it, and 600 film mod it. He says, "Thanks again, and I hope you enjoyed the prints." I do, Caleb. Very thoughtful of you. I always appreciate it when my clients send me little bonus goodies. I've had people send me all sorts of stuff over the years, from various candies, chocolates, prints, photos, accessories, second cameras even, cameras to donate for spare parts. Lots of different stuff over the years, but I think this camera is going to make an interesting video. The Ivory Model 2, as we can see here, is relatively uncommon. Now, these things were still very, very common. They're not like, you know, Henri Cartier-Bresson's personal Leica level rare, but you tend not to see as many around as you do this classic chrome and tan Model 1. The SX-70 Model 2, for all intents and purposes, is basically the same as the Model 1 from a user perspective. There are some subtle differences in things inside the camera, but effectively this was a model that was reduced as a cost reduction on the original SX-70, and that's because the original SX-70 Model 1 was a very premium camera. It had the chrome body panel finish, it had tan leather, and so this was done in ABS plastic, so they did two versions of this, the one in black and one in what they call ivory, this kind of off-white color. And this is ABS plastic, which was cheaper to manufacture than the polysulfone plastic of the Model 1. Now, on that note, I should emphasize that Model 1 cameras aren't actually made of metal. They are still plastic, it's just that that plastic has a metallic foil. In fact, I can show you that underneath the chrome body of an SX-70 is white plastic. So this is a metallic foil that gets wrapped around the plastic to give that premium finish. Now, why did Polaroid decide to do this? Well, simple. If the panels were actually made out of metal, not only would it add a huge chunk to the cost, but the camera would weigh a ton. So all SX-70s are made of plastic, even the chrome-looking ones. Now, on that chrome body I just showed you, every now and again when you peel the leather off, the chrome will come with it. There's nothing you can really do to prevent that. It's just something that happens. Fortunately, when the new leather goes on, you won't ever see that part. So, I think what we should do, let's just see what kind of signs of life we get out of the camera. Now, I have a fresh pack of 600 film. Well, this is sounding nice. Let's just test the flash assembly, see if that works too. This is a flash testing board, by the way. Polaroid used to use these as a simulation for the old school flash bars. Now, instead of magnesium bulbs producing a flash, this one is wired up to LEDs. And I was graciously gifted this by the head of the Open SX-70 project. Before that, I would just simply use flashes to test the cameras and make sure they work, but he gave me this simulator board, so I use that now. And effectively what you do is you flick the switches as if they were flash bulbs burning out. Alright, so this certainly needs a bit of a clean. It thinks that switch 3 is missing. And oh, there we go, switch 5 does work. So look, all in all, this camera appears to be in great condition to be overhauled and refurbished. Everything on it seems to be functional. Of course, the leatherette looks completely terrible. The viewfinder is very hazy, so likely we'll find a bit of fungus or haze or some kind of residue from moisture inside. But yeah, this is a good candidate for refurbishment. Everything on it seems to work nicely. It doesn't seem like it's going to need much major repair. So let's tuck in and see what else we find. On the subject of Model 2s, particularly the ivory Model 2s, these were often a real mixed bag of whatever leftover factory parts Polaroid could find to put together a camera. The Model 2 represents a period of time where Polaroid had started to realize some of the design flaws from the Model 1 and was slowly but surely upgrading little bits and pieces inside the camera. So you'll actually find, from a repair perspective, a lot of variation inside the Model 2. Now, this is not uncommon when you manufacture products on such a large scale. It kind of reminds me of like Commodore computers back in the day, like when they used to make the old Commodore 64. You'd have a lot of revisions on the PCB inside, and ultimately the computer would work the same, but for a repairman or a technician, there's a lot of very subtle differences inside one of these. And one of the things you'll find is some Model 2 ivory cameras have a metallic shutter, whereas some have the black plastic housing. So this has the black plastic housing. Some you'll find are metal. Some you'll find have the original wire type connection that connects the shutter to the body of the camera. Let me just see if I've got an example of what I'm talking about here, because I organized my spare PCBs the other day and I realized I've actually got some samples. So effectively, original Model 1s and obviously this ivory Model 2 used a connection to go from the shutter to the body of the camera that was basically a ribbon cable. So this is 7 wires all connected together, individual wires. Later models, really starting at some of the later Model 2s and going on into the Alphas, changed the material to this Kapton instead. And the official repair bulletins to the Polaroid employees said that this was because the Kapton ribbons were more durable. I'm not entirely sure what part they refer to when they say that they're more durable, because certainly my finding is that the wire is actually stronger. So the original ribbon cable with the spring tensioner between the two, much stronger than the Kapton ones, which you can accidentally rip. But obviously to refurbish this, the first thing that we're going to need to do is get inside the camera and remove the leather. And I'm going to show you guys the best way to do that on a Model 2. The cool thing about a Model 2 is the front door is actually held in place. The adhesive is held on to a plastic layer on the front. And that means that the door panel always peels off very easily, like so. Now, unfortunately, the rest is not going to be as easy as that. This does leave a sort of crusty glue residue behind. I'll show you how to remove that in just a second, or at least how I do it. These body panels are a little bit trickier to remove. And there are all kinds of guides online that talk about various different ways to reskin cameras. And far and away, the most common way that I will see amateur repairers attempting this, and I've talked about this in a previous video if you watched my SLR-680 video, but they will use a chisel. And they scrape away at the synthetic leather. And if you watched my SLR-680 video already, well, you know what I'm about to say, and that is, use a chisel if you want to bleed. This is the single most dangerous way that you can deskin an SX-70 camera. Now, the chisel does have a place. The chisel we can use to get rid of this crusty residue, but you do not want to use it to remove the skin. The adhesive that sticks this synthetic vinyl skin on is very sticky, and what's going to happen is your chisel is going to catch, you're going to slip, and you're going to send that chisel through your hand and slice yourself open, and it's super dangerous. There's an Instagram reel or a video that Retrospect put up once showing them using a chisel, and like the person doing it has this huge Kevlar mitt because it's clearly so dangerous that they don't want to stick themselves. But the other danger is, of course, to the camera if you use a chisel. If you use a chisel, there's a high risk you're going to take chips and pockmarks out of the panels because there's a little lip, and basically the chisel will nick it and will take chunks out of your camera. Really bad idea. Do not do it. It's dangerous. It can damage the camera. It's not the time or place. But we do need to remove this leather because at the very least this bottom panel has to be removed to access the internals of the camera. And of course, if we're removing that one, we might as well do the rest. There is no way to salvage synthetic vinyl leather, and when I reskin this, I won't be doing that today, but I do have some replacement leather on the way, which will look and match pretty much the same original color scheme as this. Of course, I'll ask Caleb if he wants to keep it original. He might want to put tan leather or black leather or something like that on. So I'll give him, I'll ask him and see what he thinks. But my preference is to keep these things looking as original as possible, unless the client wants to go crazy with customizations. So, if you don't use a chisel, well, how do you take the leather off? And the answer is a heat gun. Now, again, you can use a hairdryer if you don't have a heat gun. All the tools that I use are not particularly expensive, like Ryobi is just a pretty standard middle-of-the-run tool manufacturer. It's not exactly super high-end, we're not talking about Bosch here, but it is certainly hot enough and more powerful enough for what I need to do, and it's easily going to be able to strip this. As I said, you could use, your partner's hairdryer or your own hairdryer. If you don't have a heat gun, they will certainly get hot enough. And what I'm going to do is just heat up all this leather, and what it's going to do is weaken the adhesive and allow us to easily peel it off. Now you'll note just how cracked the leather panel is here. We may have to take it off in a few different pieces. As I said from my SLR-680 video, I like to sort of challenge myself and see how much of it I can peel off at once. It always turns this into a fun little game. Yeah, the reason that these skins need to be replaced is, unlike the Model 1 and the chrome cameras, which use genuine leather, these plastic-bodied cameras use synthetic vinyl, and being a petroleum-based product, it just crumbles into dust. Dear, oh dear. Now, the interesting thing that I'm seeing here, this camera may have been repaired in the past, because we can see a little tool mark underneath this leather corner. And you'll find that most technicians will take, because most of us are right-handed, will take a little screwdriver to lift up that leather. So that is suggestive that maybe this has been repaired in the past. Of course, it could just be a little defect from the factory. But yeah, it's just a matter of taking your time, trying to get as much of a peel as you can. But yeah, see because it's cracked, it wants to split and separate like that. But yeah, there's really no other better way of doing this. I would not recommend trying solvents because they can leak inside the camera. Just sweeping some of these crumbs into my bin because it's just gross. And we're going to use some more heat. So I'll just show you guys how I remove the bottom leather panel, and then I'll do the rest of it off camera because you guys get the idea by now. But yeah, some guides online will tell you to sort of soak the leather with various different solvents. Again, it's just not a very good idea. The solvents will leak through these like little panel holes and get inside the camera, where they can do things like get into the bellows or into the mirror assembly, and yeah, it's just not what you want. There we go. Can we do it? Yes. One of these days, you guys are going to see me peel the whole thing off in one go. And it is super satisfying when that does happen. So, again, I'm just sweeping my stuff into the bin here, because this is a very messy job. And it leaves a bit of adhesive behind. That adhesive is very easy to remove using lighter fluid, so also known as shellite or naphtha. And on this particular part of the door, very, very carefully, just with small movements back and forwards like so. This is where the chisel comes in handy for removing that crusty adhesive. So can you guys see the difference, right? This is just a very light layer of a very like crusty, crumbly adhesive. And you just want really, really small movements backwards and forwards. And take your time, because the last thing that you want to do is slip with a chisel, damaging yourself or the camera. Right? I'd argue it's worse to damage the camera, because your skin will heal, the camera will not. Yeah, that's really what the chisel is useful for, is removing that crusty bit. Again, it leaves a really big mess. So I'm going to go clean up my bench. I'm going to take off these leather panels, and we're going to resume work. Well, that looks a bit nicer, doesn't it? So I just spent some time completely removing every single leather panel and buffing off a whole bunch of that adhesive with a combination of shellite and alcohol, and the camera is now completely naked. Now, what I could do at the moment, if I wanted to, given that the camera has been tested and does work, I could just put a new leather skin on this, slap it up on eBay, and sell it as refurbished. And, you know, there would not be anything, I guess, inherently wrong with doing that, but these days I know a lot better. In fact, many years ago, and I'm talking, well beyond 3 years ago, I would repair these cameras in such a way that I would just repair whatever the client would want me to fix. If a camera had a broken drive shaft, I would fix that. If the client wanted it reskinned, I would do that. And I was charging very, very cheap rates. Very cheap rates, basically for the service of just getting one of these things working again. But starting around 2021, and then definitely as of 2022, I changed business models away from doing that and ended up going full overhaul or nothing. And the reason is that after enough time of repairing these things, I really started to realize that doing it any other way, in my opinion, just simply wasn't worth it. I started to realize, first of all, that some of the cameras that I previously repaired would come back for other issues, different other things finally failing that I had neglected to do before. But the main thing that I started to realize is that because I wasn't doing overhauls on every single camera, I didn't really have any kind of standard. I would see people go get my cameras that I'd refurbished and sell them on secondhand after having them fixed. They'd use them for a few months, need the money, decide to sell them on. It happens all the time, right? And they would advertise it specifically as being repaired by me. But I started to realize, well, what does that actually mean? Does that mean that I've just reskinned it? Does it mean that I've fixed the shutter? Does it mean that I've fixed the motor? There was no real standard default service that I was offering. And so I decided that I would change my ways, that model of care and that model of business was not anything that I wanted to do anymore. And I started doing full overhauls only. So when I say that I overhaul SX-70 cameras, what I really mean by that is I strip it down to the bare chassis and really rebuild it from the ground up. And that means that at a bare minimum, we're looking at the gear train, we're looking at the drive shaft, we're looking at rebuilding the motor, we are looking at things like rebuilding the shutter, making sure there's no anti-static layer, basically addressing not only things that may be broken on the camera, but all of the other incidental, preemptive repairs that need doing on an SX-70. Now, one of the reasons I started doing that as a service as well is the pandemic happened and my work ended up cutting my hours, so I had lots of extra spare time. I mean, it's not like we were doing anything else during COVID. I ended up with a lot of spare time in which that I could do extra work. Whereas before, back in the early days of my business, I was still working like a full-time job. I was really just doing this kind of stuff on a Friday and on the weekends. And many years ago, this is going back to before 2017, although I could repair SX-70s, I actually found that the demand for having them serviced was very small. And I attribute that to two things. I attribute that to the film still kind of being garbage quality before 2017, and pack film certainly still being available. But also these were fairly cheap cameras. Back in the day, you could pick up an SX-70 for not a lot of money. I remember the days where you could... Oh, look at that. So disgusting inside. Ew. Yeah, I remember the days where you could easily pick up SX-70s for anywhere from 50 to 150 Australian dollars. Any day of the week. All in good condition, too. Working, tested. You could pick them up for as little as $20. These days, I think partly because the alternatives for other types of film has disappeared. For example, you can no longer get Fuji pack film. And the fact that Polaroid film now is so good in terms of its quality that the demand for SX-70s has really shot up. And on that note, if you're complaining about the film quality of modern Polaroid film, my friend Ashley and I were talking about this the other day because I was having a look through my old photo gallery of back when I used to shoot Impossible Project film around 2011, 2012. And holy moly has the film improved leaps and bounds. It's like you can't even compare. Impossible Project film was so experimental. These days, If you're only just getting into Polaroid now, man, you don't know how good you have it. Back in the days of Impossible Project, like if you got one photo out of a pack of film that remotely resembled what you were trying to take a photo of, you were happy, right? Because it was just so finicky. And the colors were all over the shop, and yeah, it was just, wasn't an amazing shooting experience, to be honest. But yeah, certainly ever since around 2018, 2019, the demand for SX-70s slowly increased. And so did the price of the cameras. And then by the time sort of 2021, certainly 2022 had rolled around, the demand was there that, yeah, it was either a full overhaul or nothing. Now, is there anything wrong necessarily with doing a repair the other way? You know, I get it. People want repairs done at all kinds of budgets. When I was doing individualized repairs, I was charging very, very little. A fraction of what I charge now to overhaul a camera. And there are pros and con arguments to be made for each model of repair. However, experience has shown me time and time again, if you don't take the care and attention to not only fix what's wrong with the camera, but preemptively correct a whole bunch of other faults that are just inherent to SX-70s, well, you're likely not going to have a good time. You'll probably end up abandoning instant photography thinking it's all a load of garbage. And yeah, these days, that's just not my business model. Anyway, I digress because I'm all done with the cleaning now. Clearly, some adhesive or some kind of schmutz here ended up leaking inside the camera, causing quite a bit of a mess. I'll clean that a bit with alcohol before I put this thing back together, but I do want to resume repairing the rest of this camera and just talking a little bit about what exactly you may find inside a Model 2. Because as I said, Model 2s, especially the ivory versions, were a real mixed bag inside. You never really know what you're going to get when you open up a Model 2 camera. And that's because, being the cheaper version, Polaroid often just assembled these out of whatever spare parts they had lying around. But this one certainly has the early style side ribbon cable. It's got the early style capped on body flex cables. You'll often find Model 1s that have the later alpha style, like waxed paper versions, but this one has the original. It looks like this one also has the original motor driver chip and the Model 1 spec motor. So really, for all intents and purposes, this is kind of like a cross between a Model 1 and a Model 2 inside. This camera actually has far more similarities to the Model 1 than it does to most Model 2s. Now, you'll tend to find the black Model 2s are pretty standard across the run. You usually always know what you're going to get with a black Model 2, but certainly the ivory Model 2, it's a real mixed bag inside. Oh, all right. Wow, this is a very dirty PCB. Look at that. It's got like some kind of residue all over it. Like something was spilled on it or something. But yeah, part of the reason that I'm making these videos now is I feel like I've been doing this long enough and have just learned from doing repairs over such a long period of time that I now feel that unless you're going to the lengths that I'm demonstrating in this video to really just overhaul all parts of an SX-70, it's really just a waste of time. And part of me does feel bad for not doing this a long, long time ago, but the truth of the matter is I just wasn't in a position to overhaul every single thing that came across my way. And back in the day, SX-70s were so cheap, no one really wanted to pay them the money anyway. But now, certainly with the price rise of these cameras, they are very much worth refurbishing. That and the film's really great these days. But yeah, I'm trying to just get rid of, just with some alcohol on a cloth. There's so much like crumbly residue from that skin that's made its way inside like every component of this camera, like everything. Even the PCB is covered in residue from the skin. Now this particular PCB is also a great example of how little solder sometimes these things are assembled with. It's absolutely the bare minimum. So I will be redoing basically all the important points on the shutter. But I'm going to start with the body of the camera. As I've said in a few videos now, the body is sort of the beating heart. One of the first things I want to do is certainly get rid of that plastic drive shaft coupler before it has a chance to snap. So we'll pull the motor out to the side and just remove. There you go. Now this has one of the later style black plastic couplers for the motor. These were a little bit more durable than the early clear ones, but they will still break eventually, so important to get rid of them. Now, as you guys would have heard from the start of this video, this motor did sound like it was in pretty good condition. And that has me a little bit worried, and I'm still going to open up and check it anyway, because this motor sounds just way too powerful. And I've actually found in the past that what happens is the little carbon brushes on this part of the motor can actually, the little carbon brush can actually fall off the metal leg that holds it in place. And so it's actually one carbon brush and one metal leg that's contacting the motor. And that introduces way too much electrical signal noise into the circuit, but this one is totally fine. So I just wanted to check that. It just seems that what we have here is just a really strong motor, which is great. That's really good news for my client. He got lucky. Early model motors like this can be quite variable in terms of whether or not they're still working or not by this age. So I would say, yeah, you did really well, Caleb, finding this camera. And of course, I'll still refurbish the motor anyway, because that's just what I do. Might as well just make sure it's gonna last, you know, another 50 years or so in working condition. And of course, we'll clean the carbon brushes as well. Yeah, I will pay attention all to the body of this camera before we go do anything to the shutter. Very likely the mirror silicon. Well, I mean, of course it's got to be checked, but it may need to be replaced. Look how much dirt is coming off those brushes. Gross. But yeah, this camera is gonna rev hard. This is gonna be quite the little beast, I think, when it's put back together. Now I'm going to oil up the bearings because they're totally dry, and it's just a good idea. It makes the motor run a lot more smooth. Going to put the motor back together in terms of the housing. Let's just grab my screwdriver. There we go. My special little screwdriver that I've bent into just the right shape to move the brushes. There we go. I'm going to stretch the drive shaft so that it no longer needs that plastic coupler, and then we'll reassemble everything. Now these rubber bushings on the motor, because this is Model 1 spec, these rubber bushings are in amazing shape. It's only really from the Alpha and onwards that you need to replace those bushings with ones made of heat shrink, as I demonstrated in my last video where I I started refurbishing the Polaroid SLR680. So it just goes to show you how oftentimes these early cameras had better quality of parts than some of the later ones, and that's certainly no exception. Okay, now again I'm just going to force start the motor. That is just so powerful sounding. Lubricate the gears. And the other thing that I'll just do here, I'll also put a bit of lithium grease on the sliding pick arm. Again, it does sound fine, but we're going to make sure it stays fine. That's the kind of clicking noise that you should be hearing. We're going to make sure it stays that way. And I'll just brush a little bit of lithium grease onto that pick arm assembly. Polaroid would often do this on, well, most later model cameras. On some cameras they didn't. I honestly feel at some stage that it really just seems to be like what the Polaroid factory felt like doing at the time. They changed so many little subtle things. Sometimes you'll find the pick arm greased, other times they're not. It's like they were constantly changing their mind over various little things, and if you feel like they were constantly changing their mind, it's because they were. They made so many revisions on these cameras over their lifetime, fixing various little design flaws and things like that. So if you ever wonder, man, why were Polaroid constantly changing things, that's exactly why. Now this viewfinder is disgusting on the underneath. Look at this. Again, just another example as to why I only do overhauls these days. That synthetic vinyl, when it disintegrates, gets everywhere. And I mean everywhere. It will find itself into all facets of the camera's construction. It's all over the hinges. It's all over the viewfinder. There are little crumbs on the viewfinder mirror. So gross. And this viewfinder is really one that I'm going to need to completely take apart in a minute to make sure that we clean it from the inside out. Again, just because of that crumbly synthetic leatherette. On Model 1s and 2s, it's really important. Model 2s, both the black and the ivory. I'm going to grab another cloth and some glass cleaner and just clean the outside of the rubber bellows before I open anything else up. Grabbing a different cloth. I said this in my last video, but I like to use glass cleaner to clean various aspects of the cameras, not just the glass, because it's a very soft cleaner. And this is like a little trick that a lot of repair techs will do. I see a lot of like computer restoration videos where people use glass cleaner to like clean up old plastics, and it's just a really good product because it's very soft and gentle. It's not harsh like alcohol or acetone or other solvents, and the risk of doing damage is very minimal, and I actually find it's really good at cleaning the rubber. and making it look nice. So it's a great little tool. Like if you've got something that's dirty, something old, it's a great little tool to go for to start off with if you're having trouble removing stains and things. But yeah, I just wanted to clean those up. And now we can continue to take this thing apart. Now, this is very similar to the Model 1. It does not have the rivets yet that hold in the front lens board. So that's nice for us. It means we can completely separate those two. In the SLR680 video, you guys would have seen that those two little tiny stubby screws were riveted in place, which is unfortunate. It does make taking apart the camera just that little bit harder. And now we just got to remove the rear little hinge pins, which on this camera are coming out pretty easily. The last few I've had to repair have been really jammed in place. So it's very nice for the camera to not be fighting me for once. Now, I'm going to remove the rear clips that hold the bellows in. I like to do this using a screwdriver from the inside, and it's bent in a certain way so that it reaches, and I go through the little screw hole. A very clean way of getting inside the camera and doing no damage. Because this is sort of like the first time I've ever really been on YouTube, I had no real idea about what other repair videos already existed. So I did a bit of research and I found another guy opening up one of those from the outside just using a screwdriver, and yeah, he broke the chassis away from the body of the camera. Not good. Not good at all. Now, this mirror is held in place. So this is back in the day, like this, although this is the cost-reduced Model 2, it shares enough in common with the Model 1, and this silicone is super sturdy. I can't lift any aspect of this mirror. It does not wiggle at all. So I do not need to remove this and replace the silicone, which is wonderful news. At a very minimum, you absolutely need to check. If it is as secure as this one is, it's going to stay secure for the lifetime of the camera. You can just about guarantee it. But what I will do is clean a lot of the dust that has found itself inside the bellows and the viewfinder assembly. The whole mirror box is just filled with dust here. Probably a lot of that dust comes from the crumbly synthetic leatherette, which turns into powder over time. But yeah, this is looking really nice. On the subject of the viewfinder, by the way, the SX-70 has what they call an open design. So, I mean, when you erect the camera, the mirror is constantly flapping up and down, and the act of that produces like a bit of a vacuum, and it actually sucks dust in. It's inevitable that this Fresnel screen will get a few specks of dust or a little bit of carpet fluff or something like that over time. Don't worry about it too much. Obviously, if there's big bits of fungus, haze, you're getting big splotches in the viewfinder, that's a different story. But if we're talking like literally like, oh, I'm looking through the viewfinder, I can see 3 specks of dust, I wouldn't worry about it too much. Odds are those specks of dust are just going to move around. And when you take your next photo, the act of that mirror going up and down will actually move those bits of dust to somewhere else. There's nothing you can really do about that unless you like to shoot in a vacuum. It's just a byproduct of Polaroid's design that dust is inevitable. Now, the reason that I say that is every now and again you get what I like to call the white glove brigade, which they really baby their cameras. And if a single speck of dust gets in the lens, it drives their OCD nuts. And I totally get that. I'm a bit like that as well. I don't like any scuffs, nicks, any kind of cosmetic damage at all. But on an SX-70, you have to sort of train yourself to live with that because it is inevitable that it will happen at some stage. And the same goes for the shutter. Because those blades have to pass through the center of the lens, there are 2 little slots where dust will inevitably get sucked into the camera. And so if you have a few little specks of dust, don't worry about it too much. They will not affect your photo whatsoever. They'll likely move around on their own. But most importantly, they just won't affect your image quality. Now, certainly if there was large amounts of haze or fungus, again, that's a different story. But dust, if we're talking 1 or 2 specks, in my opinion, don't worry about it. You're going to be fine. Your images will be fine. And most importantly, if you test the camera and you can't see any issues on your film, you're going to be just fine. But I bring this up because I know I had a technician, a buddy of mine in the USA, have very big problems with a client recently who received his camera, started shooting with it, and then a little speck of dust ended up in the Fresnel screen. And yeah, apparently did not go down so well. He thought it was unacceptable that there was a piece of dust in there. And I'm just here to educate you guys that there's not a lot that you can do. It's just like, if you want to do something about it, you need to travel back in time and tell Dr. Edwin Land about it, and then he can redesign the camera so that that doesn't happen. But yeah, it's really nothing to worry about. It just happens. And click, there we go. So, we'll just clean the mirror surface now. And I have messaged this client and asked if they want me to put a rule of thirds grid in the viewfinder, and he has, I'm just reading his message on the computer to the side, and he says yes, he definitely liked that. So I'm going to demonstrate again how to put the rule of thirds grid in. It's a really cool little bonus thing. Because I have the camera open anyway, it's something that I just offer free of charge because it takes me literally seconds. But what I can do while the camera is open and in this position, we can actually get a pencil and draw in a grid into the viewfinder assembly, which really helps with composition. So there's a really interesting anecdote from Polaroid's production. And basically, when Land invented this camera, Land was a very specific kind of person. If he had a vision, like, there was very little that you could do to persuade him from, like, you know, not following that vision, right? And he wanted the Fresnel screen, which is this reflective surface. He wanted that to be pure matte, like you would find on an SX-70 Sonar, right? When the very first batches of SX-70s started hitting the general public, a lot of people, like especially people that wore glasses, found the cameras quite hard to focus because there was no aid, it was just a pure matte prism. And so the engineers at Polaroid were like, right, we need to install a little split prism. And Land was really dead against it. He hated the idea of any kind of focusing aid being in the viewfinder assembly because in his mind, the entire image should pop into focus at once, as would happen on a ground glass screen. And he didn't like the idea of this, you know, SLR style split prism in the Fresnel. In fact, he absolutely hated that idea. But the engineers were like, dude, people are complaining, you've got to do something about it. And effectively, they ended up just compromising and installing the split prism in the lower 1/3, which it works, but man, that was a silly idea. That was a really, really dumb thing to do, because what having that split prism in the lower third does is people's eyes are naturally drawn to that prism. And what ends up happening is people end up using that not only as the focusing aid, but as a compositional aid. And they end up composing, you know, 1/3 of the image less than they should because they assume it's the center. And so, yeah, it really draws your eye to that area. I'm just getting, there's so much, you guys probably can't see this on the camera, but there is so much dust from that synthetic leatherette that's just ended up on this Fresnel that it's just so gross. So I've had to clean that with a few passes in order to get all that dust off. But yeah, so what ends up happening, people use the little split prism as like the center of the image. They can't compose their shots properly. And so my solution to this has actually been to use a very old press photographer technique, and that's to use a lead pencil to draw on the ground glass on the Fresnel screen itself to provide a grid that then lets you actually know like where you're composing. And the split prism will still work. So the bottom 1/3 of the image, my line's now just going completely through the middle of that split prism. So you can still use the split prism now to focus, but what you can then do is pay attention to the lines in the ground glass and recenter your image as appropriate. So I actually find it's a really handy thing to do. Now, the best tool I find to mark this Fresnel screen is simply just a pencil, being that if you ever want to clean it, it will actually clean off the Fresnel. But while it's in the mirror box and nothing's touching it, that pencil is staying there forever. Nothing's actually going to remove it. And I've tried using other methods, as I explained in the SLR-680 video I did, which I did the same technique. And unfortunately, if you use something like a Sharpie, the ink runs into the little microscopic rings of the Fresnel assembly, which is not ideal. Makes the images of the lines look really, really blurry. And I've also tried carving the image, the little split prism. Oh, sorry. What am I trying to say here? I tried carving the grid in using a scribe, and boy, that didn't work either. That completely deformed the screen and was not a good idea at all. But yeah, the pencil markings are easily the best solution that I've found. But yeah, they add a grid to the screen. So now you can focus on that center image. Everything's going to be nice and center weighted, which is a really good compositional technique to use on a square frame. It's just a great idea. So as a little reward for my clients who are paying to have their camera overhauled, I offer that at no extra charge because it really just doesn't take long. And in my opinion, it really adds to the usability of the camera. The other thing that I find it does as well, often you'll find cameras where maybe the mirror has smashed at some stage or some kind of debris has got inside the mirror assembly, and it's actually caused a lot of like scratches or marks on the Fresnel screen. What I find is that, well, actually some Fresnel screens left the factory with marks and deformities. So it is actually quite common to find. And what I find that adding that rule of thirds does is actually distracts away from any marks that otherwise might be on the screen. So it's really win-win, win-win-win. And I highly rate it. So I recommend you have it done if you ever send something my way. All right, so I'm going to put these hinge pins in. I'll probably then pay attention to the viewfinder assembly, give that a clean. Then I might take a little break for lunch, grab myself some food because I'm getting hungry, and we'll come back and work on the shutter, see exactly what needs doing there. I certainly know at a minimum a whole bunch of stuff needs resoldering. And we'll bring that down here and here. Put the screws back in. And then effectively I've sort of finished work on the body at this stage, and we can pay attention to other parts of the camera. But this thing is going to be really nice when it's done. Like, it's turning out superb so far. Comparative to the condition that it was in, my goodness. This camera is going to be a little beast. Alright. We'll put in the little stubby screws for the lens board. And then we'll completely dismantle the viewfinder assembly. All right, I ended up off camera just cleaning out the entire viewfinder assembly. Super filthy inside there because of all the synthetic leather. It had crumbled and produced a whole bunch of dust. I ended up wrestling with it for a very long period of time because it was quite hard to get back together after I'd cleaned it. So I ended up doing a whole bunch of work, getting it nice and in good condition. And so what we effectively have now is a working body of the camera. If you want to see a little more in depth on how I took apart and repair a viewfinder, I did do that in the SLR680 video. What I'm going to do now is pay attention to the shutter. We're going to strip it back, make sure that everything on it is resoldered. We will check the electric eye. We will check the capacitor that is controlling the integration cycle and install a new one. And of course, we will make sure that all the lens, etc., is as nice and clean as we can get it. Now, this particular lens and shutter assembly is in very good condition. We could already actually see from the start of the video that everything worked as it should. And so I don't believe I'm going to really need to do much to this shutter in terms of keeping it working. It's really just going to be a case of servicing it and making sure that everything is working as it should. Now, generally, by the time the Model 2 rolled around, Polaroid had removed that sticky anti-static layer from the equation, so it's not something you generally have to worry about on a Model 2, but since the ivory Model 2s were often made with random parts, I will check it anyway. And just make sure everything is good to go. Yes, certainly there's no anti-static layer on that. I will just add the layer of graphite from the pencil anyway, just to ensure that everything keeps moving as nice as possible. And then we'll pay attention to the actual circuitry once this is all together. While I'm here, time to just clean the solenoid. Grab a little piece of card and add the pencil layer to the back of these blades. I like to just do this as an insurance policy, just to help prevent those blades from sticking together. But yeah, that viewfinder assembly was quite the ordeal. Very stubborn to get back together. Sometimes you get cameras that just want to fight you. Not all of them are particularly easy to do. As I said before, the lens on this camera is in pristine condition. Super nice. there's not a single piece of dust anywhere really. It's looking really clean. And sometimes you get that. Sometimes you get lenses on an SX-70 which are just in really great shape. Other times you'll see a lens and it's just an absolute mushroom farm. If you guys want an example of me cleaning a really fungusy SX-70 lens, I suggest you check out my other video. Have a look in the repair playlist and you'll see one of me cleaning the lens cell on an old Fairchild W shutter, which was in really rough shape. But that lens ended up turning out really, really nice in the end. I got B-roll footage of the before and after. And you almost struggle to believe that it's the same lens. That's how nice it turned out. Cool. But yeah, this lens is really nice. It's got some marks on the back of it at the moment from where I was cleaning the rear of the PCB with alcohol. There's a bit of residue still on there from where I was doing the cleaning. But we'll clean that off in a second with a bit of lens cleaner. Just getting the blades back in. Solenoid nice and snappy. All right, let's pay attention to the rear. There's that cloudy rear of the lens that I was mentioning before. We will get to that. But first I will do some work to the PCB. So soldering iron is on, it is nice and hot. We'll peel back the 3 legs on this camera's flash fire assembly. And the electric eye on this particular model is pretty clean. It's surprisingly not crusty. Now, I don't know if my client has already tried to clean this themselves, but yeah, it's in pretty good nick. The capacitor that's on here, I believe will be about 700, 750 picofarad, just looking at the markings. Now I've just turned my desoldering gun on. I used the desoldering gun in the first video that I did, where I did the white and rainbow one-step, and I figured out that the filter needed replacing. I was having a hard time sucking some of the original solder off, and in that video I was thinking that maybe it got broke in transit. It didn't, it just needed its filter replaced. And coincidentally happened to pack it in and give up right when I needed it. So I've just turned on the desoldering gun so that we can remove the original capacitor that's in the camera. The one thing that the client wanted done to this is to 600 modify it. Now, I am already foreseeing that the value of capacitor that I'm going to need is 600 is 150 picofarad, which I should have plenty of in my little capacitor box. 121. What do we got in here? 101. 220. 150. I am very positive that this camera is going to need a 150 picofarad capacitor. I will, of course, measure it and check it out. But yeah, in terms of choosing the right capacitor, like a general rule of thumb is you want one that's 1/4 the value. But the truth of the matter is 600 conversions are a bit of an art. The fact of the matter is the electronics on this camera are a good 40 years old, and there's no real way of predicting how the camera has stood up to the test of time. I had a camera, this is going back about 2 years now, from a client, and it needed such a tiny capacitor compared to what you would have expected that I almost didn't believe it. For sure it should have needed 180. There we go. That's sucking that solder right away. Yeah, it should have needed about 180 picofarads based on the capacitor that I took out of it, right? But in the end, I ended up going with like 100 or something like that. It was really, really small, the capacitor that I needed, because I tried a 180 and it was super overexposing. I dropped it down to 150, still the same thing. I adjusted the solenoid, which is the little adjustment screw on the side of the solenoid there that controls the pneumatic resistance. That did nothing. In the end, I needed to drop it down to 100. And the reason being was that clearly the electric eye had just lost its sensitivity, even with cleaning. So yeah, it is somewhat of an art. I did write quite an in-depth article on sort of the dark art of 600 modifying cameras. And Joaquin de Prada of the Open SX-70 project is actually hosting that on his blog. So if you want to read an insanely long article on 600 conversions, then yeah, I highly recommend you give that a little look. Now, this capacitor is 700 picofarads. So if we divide 700 by 4, well, 600 divided by 4 would be exactly 150, so we're probably looking at closer to sort of 180, based on the fact that this particular electric eye looks pretty decent, that I'm gonna say that 150 should be okay with this particular camera. If it proves not to be, I will of course have to take this apart again and redo it. So we'll hope that it's we'll hope that this is gonna be a good fit. That's what I was saying, like this is quite a dark art in terms of replacing it with the correct one and getting the camera fine-tuned. I don't show a lot of that process on the video because it's just very time-consuming. It just involves a lot of me testing with film, you know, redoing the same photo, you know, maybe 8 times in order to dial something in correctly. All right. So just soldering on the new capacitor, and of course we're going to re-insulate that with some capped on tape in just a minute. Fold the legs over, fold the legs over, fold the legs over. Great. Alright, now it is time to just make sure that lens is clean. Make sure that all the flux has been removed off of the board. Time to reassemble and reinstall the board onto the camera. Alright, where did my Kapton tape go? It is up here. Trim that down. Alright, time to grab the glass cleaner again and the cloth and really get this lens in good shape. Which, I mean, honestly, even without cleaning this, it's nearly perfect. This is, for such a rough, cosmetic-looking camera, the actual working mechanisms and optical pathway are really clean on this particular model. Let's have a look at the lens cell. Front lens cell is a little bit dusty, but that is the side that moves, so you do expect it to get a little dusty. I'm very glad that this camera didn't end up with any damage from the post office. Despite the box ending up with a good chunk taken out of it, the camera survived intact without a single issue. And SX-70s generally do. It's very rare for me to end up with a camera that's been damaged by the post office. Really, in the entire time I've been refurbishing cameras and had people send things to me, there's only really one example that I can think of a client sending me a camera where it was truly damaged by the post office, and I had this one box show up that really, like, it looked like a truck had run over it, and that developed, that ended up causing the viewfinder panel right around here on this edge to be completely snapped in half. But that's the only time that's ever happened, and it was easy enough for me to replace and repair, so the client still got a working camera in the end. And the only examples I can think of where I've actually received cameras in terrible shape have been because of packing errors, and those are usually things that I purchase from eBay. So, for example, I purchased a Keystone Polaroid once, one of the little wizards. And the seller, I don't know why they did this, but they sent it to me in a cardboard box on its own with nothing else. Like literally just a loose camera in a box, and that was it. That was all they sent me. And of course it arrived destroyed. And I contacted them and just said, what were you thinking? Like, how can you send something all the way from America to Australia in a box bigger than the camera and not wrap it? So yeah, I get a lot of international clients often worried about their cameras being damaged in the post. But the truth of the matter is the SX-70s are very strong little beasties. They are kind of fragile, but only in the erect position, really. When they are all collapsed down, they are remarkably strong. So that there's really nothing to worry about in terms of them breaking. At least provided you, you pack them adequately. Just put them in a box slightly bigger than the camera, a few layers of bubble wrap, and they will make it over here just fine. All right. Nearly done. Now, one of the things I will do with this particular model is just clean out that little flash, the little flash socket. So I keep a little folded up piece of sandpaper, very fine grit. This is about 1500 grit for this very reason, just to make sure that those little terminals are all clean. As we saw at the start of the video, when I put in the flash tester, one of the rails on the flash appeared to be a little bit intermittent. Now, truthfully, if you're going to be using something like a mint flash, the PCB edge is thick enough so that it is very likely to make contact and not be a problem anyway. And unless you're using classic old school bulb flashes, you're probably never going to notice any issues on the rails there. But just in case, I like to make sure the camera works on all those settings. Just in case someone wants to, find some old school flash bars that haven't been used and go and take old school flash SX-70 photos. Alright, looking clean, looking insulated, looking like we can start to reassemble this thing. I have no doubts that it is going to work when I reassemble it because, well, it worked before. But now it should work a little bit better. Now, I very likely won't be able to finish this video 100% today, although I would like to get this camera at least tested and working with film by the end of today. And that's for the simple reason that I don't currently have the leather in stock to finish this, unless my client Caleb wants tan leather. I've got plenty of that in stock, but I've just run out of the brown that suits Model 2 cameras. I'm waiting for some to arrive. It should be here a little later in the week. So once that's here, I will do a video just showing how I reskin a camera with the Aki Asahi leather. And by then I should have some sample photos to show you guys of what this thing is capable of. I'm hoping I don't have to go and replace that capacitor, but I believe it should be fine just looking at it by eye. It may need a little bit of calibration on the solenoid. Solenoid calibration videos and the like, I don't know if I'll ever really do a video on because they just involve so much backwards and forwards. Like it's literally a matter of tweak the solenoid, take an adjustment, take a photo. Did it work? If not, repeat the process. Like it's just a lot of tedious backwards and forwards. But as I said, if you Google the ultimate guide to 600 conversions on the Open SX-70 website, you'll see my post. It's got a picture of my face with a camera. And yeah, that's something that I wrote after just finding that all the other online guides sucked. Or were very vague, or just said things that were like only half true. And so it was a case of me doing a lot of research for several months, figuring out the best way to do things. And truth of the matter, I could probably update it further. I wrote it quite a while ago now. I've since discovered a whole bunch more nuanced stuff. But it's a very long and technical document. So it's not for everyone. And Joaquin himself, who's hosting it on his blog, was like, dude, why is this so much information? And I was like, well, it's all necessary. It's all super important. It was one of those things, like I tried to edit it, but everything I was like, no, this has to stay. This has to stay. This has to stay. It all has to stay. Cool. I'll keep the body of the camera off for the time being. Beautiful. Let's try that flash again. There we go, they all work this time, after cleaning the terminals in the flash housing. The other thing that I'll just test, actually, I will just focus at the closest distance and just check. I'm going to bring my light over here. Just check. Yeah, that is completely hopeless. The last thing that I need to do is adjust that flash cam. At the moment, in flash mode, I can see just with the naked eye that the aperture on that cam is woefully out of spec. This camera, if you tried to take a flash photo at the moment, would produce something absolutely underexposed, because only a little pinhole of an aperture is actually being produced. So I'm going to adjust this. There's a little eccentric screw in here. This is a very tiny part, by the way, called the flash cam assembly. And this basically hooks onto a secondary solenoid. And what happens is the secondary solenoid engages this little spring-loaded flap. So it pulls the flap down, and then during an exposure, depending on where that flap is sitting, the aperture will open to a certain distance. So this is all based off distance because it's connected to the focusing wheel. So basically, the closer you focus, the smaller the aperture. The further away you focus, the larger the aperture is going to be. So I am going to adjust this. I need my special screwdriver here. And the eccentric screw is like glued in place. I find if you heat it up, that screw moves a lot easier. But this screw is very fragile. I do certainly find that it moves far easier once it's been heated. Okay. And it's basically just a matter of trying different positions until the aperture makes the shape that it should at a certain width. And I know how this works just by doing it from eye because I've done it so many times. The shape of the aperture blades at the minimum distance of about 10 inches should look kind of like an aeroplane. If you were to look at like a Boeing 747 from the front, like standing directly in front of it, you should see the nose of the airplane and the two wings either side. That's the best analogy I can come up with for what the shape should be. And you'll know, once you've seen that shape, you'll know what it should look like. But yeah, that's how you calibrate the flash cam on one of these things. It's all done with aperture shape at the minimum distance. Okay, so we'll just put this nut back on. Cool. There we go. Nut is back on. Now I just need my flash tester again. And if this still is not in sync, I'll just need to repeat that process a few times. But now that that screw is loose, I should be able to adjust it with it on the camera. Whoops, wasn't at minimum distance. Hey. Perfect. Got it first time. Yeah, I've done that so many times that I can just do it by eye. But yeah, if you use a mint flash now, that's going to take a perfectly exposed photo. So what I've got to do is just make sure I re-glue that eccentric screw back down, and then I can box everything back up. I will resume this video once the leather has arrived. I'm going to insulate that with Kapton tape. I'm going to put this all back together. We need to wait for the leather to arrive, but in the meantime, I can film test this thing. So the next time that you see it, I should have some sample photos, and this camera should be looking nice and clean. All right, until then. Actually, before I totally pack up for today, I realize I haven't really talked about the rollers much in an SX-70. The rollers on an SX-70, Model 1, Model 2, right the way through to the Sonars, had a top roller that's kind of this yellow color. And that yellow is like a rubberized layer. The number one reason that your camera may not eject film, like if you can press a button and the film starts to slide out but it isn't picked up by the roller, the number one reason is that the rubber, that yellow rubberized coating on the top, has sort of dried out. If you get some isopropyl alcohol and a cloth and you keep on cleaning that top panel, the stickiness of that rubber will eventually come back. So I highly recommend every few packs of film, like every 10 packs or something like that, clean the rollers with a bit of water. If you find that they start to lose their stickiness, a bit of alcohol will rejuvenate it. It's just a little tip. If you've ever read the official instruction booklet for an SX-70, you'll know that they mention to clean the rollers pretty consistently. But I just thought that I would bring that up. And the other thing that I went and did is I added the little blue washer back underneath the wheel now that I know that the flash cam is focusing properly. And I also greased the flash cam to make sure that it is as smooth as possible. So now I'm ready to box this up. Next time you see it, we should have leather here. I'll be reskinning it, and there'll be sample photos. Well, we are back, everybody. The camera ended up working perfectly fine with a 150 picofarad capacitor. I did have to tweak the solenoid. The pneumatics were way off in this thing. It was well over an entire turn, or near enough to an entire turn out of spec. But I'm happy to report that it works indoors and outdoors and with flash. So super stoked with how this thing exposes across the board. 150 picofarad, nailed it straight out of the gate once the solenoid was tweaked. And so all we have to do to finish Caleb's camera is reskin it, of course. And that is exactly what I'm going to do. So all screws are in place, and I'm going to start just with the bottom panel. And I'm going to be using Aki Asahi tan leather. Now, the white ivory Model 1s never came out in a tan skin. However, white plus the tan skin does happen to look particularly good. I've done this combination before, and so that's what Caleb has requested, and I'm happy to oblige. As a general rule of thumb, I keep 3 colors in stock. I keep the original chocolate brown, I carry black, the same crinkle emboss that you guys would have seen in my SLR680 video, and of course I carry the chrome and tan style leather. And the reason that I generally carry just those 3 colors is those are the 3 colors that the factory used when it came to these cameras, and those 3 colors really doesn't matter which versions you use on what cameras, they always look like they left the factory that way. And I tend to find especially that clients from Australia really like their cameras to look original. I do genuinely find the vast majority of my clients really like their stuff to look like it just rolled off the factory assembly line. That is, of course, a generalization. Some people do like to customize things, but I like to keep things looking fairly stock where I can, unless a customer of mine tells me to really go nuts. But one of my favorite ways of modifying cameras is to do so in a way that looks factory but isn't. Because this thing is going to end up looking so nice by the time that it's finished. Despite the fact that these cameras never came out with a tan skin, it's going to look like it should have. And so only a real nerd would know that. Only a real nerd would go, hang on, only chrome body Model 1 and Alpha cameras came out with tan skin. What's that doing on a Model 2? Well, that's the kind of mods that I like doing, where it's very subtle. I must say the technique that I'm using for reskinning this camera, by the way, is called the wet technique. I have a little pump bottle here of isopropyl alcohol, and what I'm doing, just off camera, so I'm not spraying the camera or spraying myself in the face, I'm spraying the bottle so that the alcohol mist basically collects on the sticky surface of the leather. And what that's going to mean is when that sticky surface is wet with alcohol, I can actually slide it around and position it so that I can make sure it's 100% aligned without making any mistakes. And it's a really good technique if you're a bit of a novice. Because it just allows you to slide things around. There we go. And you don't need to worry too much about Aki Asahi and getting alcohol on the leather, because his dyes that he uses are quite alcohol resistant. They're not going to discolor or anything like that. Leathers from Hugo Studio do, so you do have to watch that if you're going to be reskinning your camera with skins from Hugo Studios. But Aki Asahi, you're generally going to have no troubles. And he actually recommends on his website that you do this technique. He recommends using a brush, but I typically find that puts too much alcohol on on the skin, so I prefer to just pump it on. And then one last piece, just going to go on the top there. Just on this panel. Wonderful. And there we have it. One reskinned SX-70 Model 2 in ivory, looking very schmick. Well, I hope you guys have enjoyed watching this video. As always, if you'd like me to refurbish one of your Polaroid cameras, please feel free to get in touch. All of my contact information is down below, and I'd like to say thank you to everyone that already has. I've only had this channel up just over a week by the point of me posting this video, and I've already got several of you sending things my way, and I'd like to just express my thanks to any of those who are choosing to support a little local independent technician such as myself. At the moment, this is pretty much what I'm doing full-time. It may end up that I get some other kind of part-time employment in the future. But at the moment, my goal is really to try and see if I can do this and basically pay all the bills by doing nothing but repairing Polaroids. I'm not exactly sure that that's sustainable, but certainly if it did become sustainable, it would make my dreams come true. Because I do thoroughly enjoy bringing these things back to life, even when they are tricky and being difficult. But yeah, this camera has ended up really nice, and I'm sure Caleb's going to be super stoked with it. Thank you for watching as always. And again, if you like what I do, like, subscribe, or if you'd like to support me and can't necessarily send me a camera, I do have a link down below for my Ko-fi account where you can send me a donation there. I hope you all have a wonderful day, and I will see you next time.